Hey everybody, Shawn here from the Automation Blog and School, and in this episode of the Automation Podcast, I sit down with Jason Andersen from Stratus to learn all about their fault-tolerant products. Jason, thank you for coming on the Automation Podcast. It's great to have you here. Before we jump into your presentation and demonstration, can you tell the audience a little bit about your role at Stratus?
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to. I work Stratus. I've been there about 8 years. I lead strategy and product management at Stratus. So I kind of define not only where we're going to take the company, but also what we build to support that. And like I said, I've been there about 8 years. We've been working at the Edge for about 5 years, pretty heavily. But prior to that, we were, a traditional kind of horizontal IT company. I came into the company 8 years ago to help kind of become more software centric and more solution centric. And we've largely done that at the Edge. So that's been pretty exciting. Large transformation Stratus. A lot of people we've been around 40 years. A lot of people know the name, but they usually say things like, well, yeah, I remember something about you from 10 years ago. It's a very different looking company than it was even a few years ago now.
Awesome. So what are we talking about today? Let's tell our audience what we're going to dig into.
Sure. So today, really wanted to talk about how mission critical computing can be delivered at the edge, particularly edge computing in general, right? But we find that in certain industries that are automated, like manufacturing, it's not just about bringing a computer there. It's about making sure that it's able to stand up to the rigor that a manufacturer would want, right? Just like their machines, right? They have to put up and stand up and last for the long haul. So I have a quick intro on what we make and what we do, and then I actually have a demonstration of kind of how all of our technology comes together in a factory setting, if that works.
Excellent. Let's get into it.
So, and I'll be very mindful that your audience is both tune in from a video and an audio only perspective. So I will do my best to paint the picture with words as well. So like I mentioned, Stratus has been around for about 40 years now, and the company started out building solutions around mission critical computing, particularly a set of technologies called fault tolerance, which really comes to mean that a system can go down or an application could go down, and not only will the system continue to run uninterrupted, but also without any loss of the data, right? So in-flight data is a big issue around the world in a lot of different industries, and we've been doing that for about 40 years, and we have about 25,000 customers around the world using our technology. And it's funny because a lot of people will instantly think of something like phone calls or bank transactions, which is where we started our history. But the truth is that we're now very heavily deployed in what's now commonly known as the edge. Wastewater treatment, we treat, a couple 100 billion gallons of water every year. We do a lot of gas and oil pipelines around the world, but we're also used in discrete manufacturing, transportation, public safety, which is now becoming much more edge aware and automated. So a lot of industries. And again, kind of the bellwether of our house was the payments and card processing business, where we still have a heavy participation. But these new areas for computing and new arenas where computing is being deployed is really the bulk of our business today. In fact, about 70% of our product revenue now comes from what we call edge deployments versus what we'll call a traditional data center. And, when people go, well, geez, they'll say, well, geez, okay, that's interesting. Mission critical computing, isn't everything mission critical, or aren't I doing this already? There's a lot of different ways to look at these solutions. And if you look at systems availability at a high level, what we really are trying to do is bring an IT-like set of capabilities, especially when it comes to availability and resilience, to places where there is no IT presence, right? So the factory floor is a perfect analogy for this. You don't have an IT person, with that skill set. But despite the fact that IT isn't present there, you still are expecting that kind of consistency and that kind of, basically operability that you would get from a data center in your own data center, or even now in a cloud, right? So when you're comparing these solutions, it's like, backup is pretty good. We see a lot of backup being executed in either the factory floor or in oil gathering and all these places. But the fact of the matter is that if something goes wrong, you're losing potentially in a backup hours of data and hours of uptime, right? Which is really kind of the worst case scenario. People can graduate to different levels of this, right? You can do disaster recovery, or if you're using a virtualization technology, you could actually use like what they call high availability solutions, which is, if a system or an application goes down, the work will migrate to another system seamlessly, which is how you see things work in the cloud, right? And that's pretty good because it's better, right, than like losing hours. You lose minutes, so it's an order of magnitude better in some cases. But these solutions can be complicated and expensive, right? So what we basically do is we focus our attention on how to kind of take all that off the table, which is you lose no data. The system to the user, from a user perspective, is automatically failed over to another system, so there's no loss of computing service or data. And we make it so you don't have to change your application. So for example, we have a huge install base of people using InTouch, right, from Wonderware, Aviva, tons and tons of customers using that. And what we provide is the ability to just deploy that technology right on top of our machine. You don't have to change a thing, no special scripts, no special configuration. You just put it on like you'd put it on any machine, and it works, right? Whereas again, in some of these other solutions, it requires a bit of work. So we really bring something that's not only the most available, but it's also the easiest to set up and really kind of the easiest to service over time, which is really what sets us apart. And this particular problem that we solve is even more profound when you start doing digital transformation projects. And I'll just kill the builds here, right? But the idea is when you start deploying a digital transformation process, whatever it is, and whatever edge industry you're doing it in, you start to find some kind of very familiar trends. The first is that there's a lot more stuff that gets deployed out there that has a technology backbone. If that's a device, or even if it's even at the software level with platforms and protocols. So there's just this huge, massive stuff that starts to happen when you do digital transformation because you haven't been doing it before. And when you have more stuff, IT becomes a lot more interested in getting involved, right? Because they want to manage like things like the cybersecurity threat canvas, which could be a major problem for you. If you start deploying all this stuff, now you've invited in potential for hacking or malware or ransomware attacks. They also, when IT gets involved, they also want to make sure that, they're not going to be getting a lot of phone calls about it when it doesn't work, right? So reliable, secure, and scalable are a big deal. The one that's a little bit different that you see, in the cloud and in your data center, they're potentially refreshing your gear every 2 or 3 years, 4 years, something in that time frame. If you go out and look at what hardware refresh cycles are at, wastewater treatment facility or even a factory, when you buy machines, you're looking at life cycles of a decade. What you don't want is a system setup where you're changing your hardware every few years and it's kind of out of line with your hardware, with your machine refresh. So that's potentially a real thing we get asked about a lot, is how can we extend the life cycle of our compute, which is something we do pretty well. So ultimately, what we do is we don't, the other thing that we see is that we don't necessarily default to any one particular software and automation platform, right? So we do a lot of work with Rockwell here in the Americas, but we also do a lot of work around the world with companies like Yokogawa. So we really collaborate in ecosystems to make sure we fit into whatever automation solutions you're buying. But that said, as people become more IT centric and management technology, IT management technology becomes more remote, you want to also provide plug and play capability. So, to make it easy, not only to plug into the ecosystem, but also the technology backbones. And ultimately, this is becoming about how do we manage and service this stuff. I mean, if you look at some of the announcements that were even made at Automation Fair with Rockwell, what's crazy is that they're now starting to get more and more into IT, and they have IT management capabilities now. And their services capabilities on their own are very heavily IT focused. So it's not necessarily about, the speeds and feeds of the solution or that. It's really about interoperability and management is what we're finding. And that is a big differentiator when you start to look at these edge technologies. If you're doing a digital transformation project, the edge technology you should look at should have these types of capabilities, right? And then lastly is how can you work with your vendors to ensure that there's a long life cycle to it, right? You want to be able to get the highest return on investment, but you also want to have kind of the lowest headache over time as well, because you just don't want to be out there refreshing things out of band and having these kind of issues where you deploy one thing, you refresh it, it breaks something else down the line, those types of things. So we solve the problem in 3 ways, right? So we try to solve these problems that I articulated by providing a bunch of different solutions, right? And primarily there's 3 of them. We've historically sold servers, right? Computer servers, very large systems that, typically are deployed in a data center, right? And like I mentioned, is that you take a server, you deploy it in a data center, it's providing you some sort of application service to all your users. We have a product called FT Server that's been in the market now for 20 years. It's kind of, I'll call it our flagship product line. And really that's geared for the IT folks who take care of edge sites, right? So if you're a large manufacturer, let's say you're above a couple 100,000 square feet facility, you probably have a data closet or some sort of even small data center in your site. And you probably even have an IT resource or 2 deployed there. This is the type of product that they would leverage to, deploy automation applications out to this. They're they come with performance and scale and all this other great stuff. We tend to deploy FT Server in manufacturing and energy and transportation, primarily a little bit in public safety. But what we found is that, there's this, when you're starting to do analytics or when you're starting to kind of deploy HMIs in a more, virtualized software-based way, and use things like tablets. And so as you start to really deploy more modern technology, you really want to distribute some of that server type capability even further into maybe at the line level or at the specific machine level, right? Something that's more even embedded into a device itself or a large machine, like say a metal bending process or something like that. So we invented this product called ZTC Edge, which is essentially, when you look at it, you go, well, geez, it's just an industrial PC. What is it, right? Well, the truth is it's really an industrial PC that's been injected with some very robust set of software capabilities. It's a very large industrial PC that's been injected with server capabilities. So it's able to really kind of take the value that a server provides with virtualization, containerization, all this stuff, and put it into a form factor that's deployable just about anywhere, right? And then we also have a lot of customers who want to embed just the software part of ZTC, right? They say, well, geez, this is a cool idea, but I want it to be a smaller system or a bigger system, or, we kind of come out with our own cookie cutter sizes. So the software that runs on ZTC is effectively this technology we have called Everrun. And Everrun's deployed a lot for really kind of custom built systems integration projects, right? So you see it a lot in, buildings and building management. We have it in places like toll booth collection systems. So really, this is kind of more the far reaches of the edge, maybe a little bit outside the manufacturing domain, but you see it deployed in bomb scanning in airports, automated transportation like monorail systems, things like that. Really is where people go, geez, I want this kind of hardened software, but I want to deploy it in a place where basically maybe I have different system requirements than the typical manufacturer. So we really kind of hit the market globally in 3 different ways. FT Server's our largest product in terms of revenue and unit ship, but ZTC is really closing the gap because we have a lot of really interesting partners who are embedding the technology and putting it in as kind of the default for all their units, for example.
Well, I really appreciate this slide. Having worked with Stratus in the past life, I was very familiar with the FT server. Great option if you had a
a manufacturing facility or a mine or a water wastewater plant
Yeah.
that had mission critical software that had to run, but they were not going to hire an IT guy to sit at this remote location with the actual workers to babysit it. And it was just such a great solution for that. You didn't need an expert, you didn't need an IT guy, a PLC guy, an engineer, who's or really a high level electrician who maintains the automation could, if a new part came in from Stratus, they could slide it in, no problem, right?
Right.
They're ESD, knowledgeable and all of that. So, from my perspective, just from where I'm coming from, and I think some of the followers that coming from, they may have known about FT Server. So it's going to be great to learn about these, or even hear more about the new options you have here.
Yeah. The real thing that we've started to realize was that, when you go talk to an automation, like a local automation SI or even a value added reseller type, there's need for both, right? There's need for increasingly what you're seeing. A great example of ZTC Edge is that we have a partner we're working with who builds bioreactors, which create drugs like pharmaceuticals and vaccines and things like that. And what they're saying is, look, in order for us to deliver a next generation bioreactor, not only does it need to have an HMI on it, right? So somebody can actually operate this thing, but it also needs to have analytics software on it because we're now collecting real-time data on the batches and how that's working. We need to have connectivity to potentially a cloud-based application where we're sharing some of those analytics for reporting across, say, a wide range of sites. And then they're saying, I also want to have something like an augmented reality application deployed on this machine. So I can walk up to the machine with my phone, scan a QR code on that, and then be able to service this entire device from my phone, right? Looking up, why is this thing not working? Or is there a blockage in the pipe or something like that? So what's happening is every machine is getting more and more software deployed to it. And that's really where we're going, well, a typical IPC or a PLC can't really necessarily do that. It really almost could sit on top. And what we're seeing with these guys is that it sits on top of a set of PLCs that actually govern what the machine does. It's really almost an added layer that they never had to think about before. And when we saw that opportunity arise, we were starting to see our VARs come to us saying, look, these people are starting to deploy machines, or we have people who build machines and skids for their customers, and they're coming to us, and we're kind of stuck. And that was really what drove us to invent ZTC Edge. The funny part was Everrun was around prior to ZTC Edge, and we were already doing it for the SIs on some level by just selling them the software. But a lot of SIs, particularly here in the United States, are going, look, my machine is complicated. As you just said, I just want to tack something onto the side of this thing and have it really simple and make it easy to deploy. And in fact, what we're finding is that those partners are also asking us to provide some care and feeding for that compute part of the device, right? We're not necessarily going direct to your customer, but we're going, okay, we'll support that device for you on your behalf while you're supporting the entire machine. And that's another thing that's really changing is how people are consuming these services. Are they buying machines as a service, or are they buying managed service contracts with the machine, whereas before they take care of it themselves? All these dynamics are changing, and it really is opening up some unique doors for how computing can be deployed and how software can be deployed in a manufacturing site. So just to wrap up a little bit. So what does this mean, and how are we kind of looking at this? Well, when you think about Industry 4, I think a lot of people with the pandemic, we haven't heard as much about Industry 4 lately because, everybody's dealing with supply chain issues and the pandemic and things like that. But when you start to look at how things are going to go in the future and how software is being developed, a lot of our work is with software partners who are positioning software solutions at the edge. We're seeing this kind of collapse in terms of what computing is going to happen at the edge and how it's going to be, computing is ultimately going to be delivered, and software is going to be delivered. First, you're going to see more cloud. I think everybody agrees that there'll be more data pushed into the cloud from the various edge sites, and there's a whole raft of things that have to be done in order to enable that to happen, both on the data and security side. Then there's the whole point of, well, what happens at the machine level and what happens in between, right? And what we're starting to see is that there's this emergence of this idea called the micro data center. And the micro data center for me is really just, how do I take that server closet and start to assemble it and compose it in a way that it's easy for me to deploy it almost in a more flexible fashion or a modular fashion. So instead of every data closet being this bespoke custom setup, you're actually just deploying a rack of servers with everything pre-configured and ready to go. And in fact, we have one of those solutions in market today with Avnet and Schneider, where we basically have been partnering with them to build a pre-built micro data center solution with Stratus hardware in it. And then there's edge compute devices, which is essentially what ZTC Edge is all about. And those are going to be deployed in a more distributed fashion, right? But they have to be able to take on a couple of key tasks. The first is, software workloads in general, like I mentioned before. But you also have to start to think about, is there an opportunity to do things like soft PLCs more robustly, right? And this is where you could start to see some opportunities to kind of replace some of these expensive and in some cases proprietary devices and put them into a software-based device like a ZTC Edge. So both of these kind of infrastructure layers will continue. There'll be fewer layers. There'll be more consolidation, just as you normally see in the IT world. But we really do see it kind of being like either at the factory level with a micro data center, or then it's at the machine level, if you will, with the compute device. And ultimately, like I said, we have a couple things in mind. One is that ZTC Edge is only a couple years old. We think there's a lot of life to that. FT server itself is actually, like I mentioned, over 20 years old. So we're in the process of, over the next couple of years, releasing what we're calling ZTC Next, which is kind of a next generation of the FT server product to really kind of dial in on some of these micro data center needs. FT server is a great solution for it now, but we think we can do better. So, but we are seeing this kind of idea where computing will collapse. I think a lot of people in the beginning, when we started to talk about IoT and edge and all this stuff, they thought they were going to just deploy gateways all over the place and all these little Arduino, and just put it all over the place. I don't think that's going to, I think people are finally starting to turn the corner that that's not going to really work, because it just opens up much more risk to the business from a security standpoint, but it also really it becomes really hard to manage. And that management shift goes back on the OT folks, and they don't have the time themselves, right? So they need to find a way to kind of have an IT-like solution that they can manage themselves.
Makes a lot of sense.
Just to talk about ZTC Edge Next for a minute, what we're trying to do is actually get something to a lower footprint so that's smaller than the FT server. We're trying to leverage the latest technology in terms of what's coming out from the processor world and memory, right? Because there's been a lot of advancements in those areas, and really work on some stuff that gets you a little bit more future-proof, and then really use technologies around performance and standard IT operating systems. That's the other thing I think we're seeing at the edge, is that a lot of folks have their own flavor of Linux. You go buy a system from a vendor and they have their own flavor of Linux on it. They don't really support it very well. What we really want to do is continue to work with the vendors we have who have been doing this for years and years and years. The reliability aspect of this doesn't change in terms of how we deliver it. So it's the same as FT server. But the other element we're adding is around serviceability, where we're going to make the system a lot more modular. So it's easier to kind of take damaged componentry out and replace it. You can see the architecture uses some new technology called PCI Express backplanes. So the idea is that from the back and the front, somebody can get at this thing and take the pieces they need and swap them out, much in the same way you do with a PLC on a DIN rail, right? Except it's in a rack mount 2U build. So that's what we're working on. That'll be out sometime in late, it's 22 now. So we're talking in 2023, beginning to middle of 2023. We're about a year and a half away from that new technology so we're just starting to get into prototypes, but we're pretty excited about it because, again, it's all the stuff we've been doing for years, but made it more edge optimized.
That's excellent. I'd really love to have you back on when you actually release it, and to see the next generation. That'd be very cool. Now, I think what did you have next? A software demo? Okay.
So what I did want to talk about is, so that was a lot of tech stuff, that was pretty interesting. But, what we have is, what we've learned is that, as people get more on board with this, they want to learn more, and they want to see it really how it applies to them directly, right? And with COVID and everything, it's hard to go out and do a POC. We did a ton of POCs in 2019 and early 2020,
Proof of
where
concept.
we got to bring technology to you and try it out. But what was coming back was people said, well, now we can't anymore. So how do we do it? So we built this thing that is like not a technology demo, but it's actually showing how edge computing can help a customer out. So, so let me describe what we have for the people listening on audio only. Is we built this tool that you can get to from the web. You can get to it from our website called the Edge Customer Experience, right? ECX is what we call it internally. And the idea is that we start out at the very highest level. You're looking down on a factory from the sky, right? So the idea here is to say, look, you're in charge of a factory, or you're an IT person supporting a factory, you're an OT person operating a factory, but here's the factory, right? And then we zoom in, right? So we zoom into the factory level. And what's pretty cool about this is that, so what you have is basically a hybrid process factory. Think of it maybe like a food and beverage type of company might be a decent example for this, right? And basically we really kind of want to give two views of how this factory can be looked at. So you can actually start with use cases. And use cases really, to me, are more geared towards the IT folks, right? Which is, okay, I need a solution for a data intensive application, or I want to consolidate my workloads into a single server backplane. So really the idea is to show a factory and show a view of the factory kind of more from an IT person's perspective, okay? And then you can kind of zoom in on it. So if we went to, I'll just pick data intensive applications here. It zooms in down to what is actually a micro data center, right? In this case, right? So you can see that it's deployed. It's basically a small rack. It's deployed on the plant floor. However, it's deployed in a rack that's got some special capabilities in terms of being, environmentally sensitive and dust proof and so forth. But the idea here is really to say, okay, well, this is what the solution is, and here's how we would solve the data intensive application problem, right? We would deploy an edge computing platform that's optimized for the data needs. We would, have put in networking in place to enable AI and ML, those types of things, and really just kind of give a description of that. Then, if you want to understand how FT server in this case fits into that category, you can click on that, get some information, learn more. Actually, we'll just click on it, and you can see, all the benefits and features and overview and stuff. So if you're an IT person looking at it from that perspective, that's pretty cool. But if we zoom back out and we look at what we'll call environments here, that's really more about the way OT folks talk, right? And I think one of the things that I'll just kind of mention that, we've been in the IT business for 40 years. I've personally been in the IT world and selling products, inventing products for IT folks for 20 plus 25 years, whatever it is. What I'll tell you is that what we've been really tried to do here is really, and we've been doing this for years with our partners, is really try to put ourselves in the OT person's shoes, because ultimately we talk more to OT people than IT people. I think sometimes when you go into these factories, the IT folks don't necessarily talk the OT language yet, but we've really worked hard on that the last few years. So in this case, we talk about, well, what are the solutions that you've got here? Like, for example, what's on the platform, what's in the embedded in a machine, where's warehouse automation, production line. So these are really kind of a solution oriented type of thing. And in this case, we'll just happen to look at production line. I think, hopefully I picked the right one. There we go. Perfect. Production line is really, okay, now I actually have a machine that's doing something, right? And I'm an OT person. There's a little guy standing next to it, but you see ZTC Edge mounted on a rail. And it really talks about what ZTC can do in terms of helping out with, SCADA or batch or MES or any of the other types of applications we support, and how it's deployed in the context of the machine. You get the guy with the tablet using the HMI and what it can do. So again, this was really to help anybody really. Like I said, you just go to our website, and if you're an IT person or an OT person, you can actually start to see how edge computing can help, where it can be applied to help you. And then, of course, since it's from Stratus, you'll actually see our own products in the context of that solution, right? And again, we really feel that edge computing has got this great benefit, but the truth is it does feel like, for the last few years, there's been a lot of evangelism required to get people on board. I mean, in the early couple of years of when we started doing this, a lot of the early adopters saw what we were doing and going, yeah, I get it, right? I totally get this. I'm going to do it, right? We had some initial success, but what we find is that, there's a constant process of us, especially with the last couple of years, just saying, well, this is how it's going to help you out. This is where it fits. And it's really not about us versus a competitor. It's more about why you need us and how we can help you, right? So we built this tool to help you do that, at your leisure, if you will, and not have to come on site and help and cause all kinds of disruption, right? So that was really what I had to cover today, Shawn. I mean, I think that was the goals, but happy to take any questions you have, or if you want me to poke around here a little bit more, I could show you a little bit more.
Well, yeah, I get some questions. So what's the website first for those listening, maybe driving? What's the name of the website?
Yes, www.stratus.com. And then this is on the banner on the first page. Yeah.
Okay. stratus.com.
That's right.
For those of you driving and want to go visit later. And this is a really cool, like interactive, interactive brochure. And, it's showing for those folks, it's showing a plant like he said, and, it's zooming into different levels, whether it be a server or be like an industrial PC in a cabinet with a PLC. So I definitely want to encourage those audio listeners, if you want to learn more about their products, this is a great way to do it. Very interactive look and feel to it. So I just wanted to throw that out there for the audio audience.
Yeah, no problem.
Yep. But no, that was great. So what would be, let's say somebody's listened to the podcast, they're like, I want to find out more. They come up here, they check this out. What would be their next step if they wanted to, get more information about the products you were talking about today?
Well, there's a couple of ways. I think the first is that well positioned on the demo unit. When you launch this from a website, from a browser, you see "Contact Us" is right there. So I mean, you just click on that, and it brings you right into a contact page to set up a meeting request on it. So we can instantly set you up to have a discussion with somebody and figure this out. The other thing I'll mention is that we have the way we get to customers. Ultimately, we don't sell a lot of our solutions direct. The truth is we do it through partnerships, right? And so, for instance, here in the U.S., we are an Encompass level partner with Rockwell Automation. We're also a top tier partner in the Aviva /Wonderware ecosystem, as well as inductive automation. So we tend to have these large partnerships with different vendors. So if you're already working with a local distributor or a VAR, we also work in the GE electric ecosystem. So I think if you already have a distributor or a VAR that you're already working with, there's a pretty darn good chance that we work with them as well. So you could reach out to those folks that you already have a relationship with. So those would be the two ways. I mean, obviously, if you contact us, like the most likely scenario when we get contacted is when we hear who you are and where you're located, we tend to look for our local partners to team up and work with you to make sure that you get the solution you need. Because, I would probably say more than 90% of the time, people who are looking for an edge computing solution aren't looking for it to be standalone. It's always bundled in with some larger project. And when that happens, you want to make sure that we've got everybody kind of properly covered and set up. So those would be the two routes I would go to find us.
That's excellent. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today and going through all that. I learned a lot and updated my knowledge as well. So thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. And any final words?
No, other than have a great 2022. Hopefully we all keep moving forward this year, right?
Absolutely. Thanks again.
No problem.
Well, I hope you found that product update helpful, and I want to thank Jason for taking all that time out of his busy schedule to put that together and come on the show. With that said, if you're watching the video edition, please give us a like and a sub. And if you're listening to the audio-only edition, please consider giving us a 5-star review, because that really helps us grow our audience and find new vendors to come on the show. With that said, you always can get in touch with me or follow me over at automation.locals.com, and you'll find all my training courses over at theautomationschool.com. With that said, I want to wish you all a very happy, safe, and healthy week. And until next time, my friends, peace.